I never thought buying a pair of pants could feel like a date, but there I was, standing in a tiny vintage suit shop on a slow Tuesday afternoon, hoping for jeans and ending up with a full-on heartthrob. You know how sometimes you just need a new pair of pants? Nothing fancy, just something that fits right and doesn't make you look like you borrowed your dad's wardrobe. That was me. Mid-20s, kind of awkward, definitely not a fashion guru, just trying to upgrade from sweatpants to something that said, "I'm an adult," without screaming it. The shop was tucked into a quiet corner of the city, all exposed brick and dim amber lights, smelling faintly of cedar and old fabric. I hadn't planned to spend more than 10 minutes there, but then he appeared. The guy behind the counter had this old school vibe, like he'd stepped out of a black and white movie. He was lean, maybe early 30s, with dark hair that looked like it belonged on a jazz musician. His eyes caught mine as I wandered around, looking awkwardly at racks of blazers and suspenders. "Looking for something specific?" he asked with a smile that was warm but kind of teasing. I stammered a bit, something about needing pants that didn't fall off, and he nodded like he'd heard it all before. Then he said, "Let me measure you, it's the only way to get the right fit." I wasn't expecting that. I was used to self-checking the size tags or just hoping for the best. But there was something about how he said it, slow and deliberate, that made me agree. He grabbed this old measuring tape, like the kind your grandmother might have, and motioned me to stand in front of a full-length mirror. I felt my stomach tighten, a little nervous because this was a bit more personal than just picking pants off a shelf. He asked me to step up on a small wooden platform, then gently pulled my leg up, sliding the tape from my ankle up to my crotch. The way he took his time, not rushing, just observing, made the air between us electric in a way I didn't expect. I kept stealing glances at him, trying to figure out if this was just professional courtesy or something else. He caught my eye every now and then, and each time, his smile deepened just a little, like he was sharing a secret. The shop around us faded into the background, the soft hum of the old jazz record playing, the faint rustle of fabric, the quiet ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. When he finished, he didn't just hand me the tape back like a cashier would. He held it a second longer, his fingers brushing mine, and for a moment it felt like the world paused. I tried to play it cool, but I'm pretty sure I failed miserably. He said something almost under his breath. "Perfect fit, just like you." I laughed nervously, unsure if he was joking or if I was that oblivious. That's when he straightened up and said, "Give me a few minutes. I'll find you something that feels as good as that measurement." So here I am, waiting in this little vintage suit store, heart pounding, wondering if buying pants is about to turn into something way more complicated and way more interesting than I ever expected. He disappeared behind a curtain that separated the back room from the main floor, and I was left standing there, suddenly hyper-aware of how out of place I felt in a shop that seemed so carefully curated and steeped in its own kind of elegance. My eyes drifted back over the racks. There were suits and trousers of every kind, all looking like they'd lived a dozen lives before landing here. I ran a hand along a navy blue blazer as I waited, trying to shake off the weird mix of excitement and nervousness that had settled in my chest. After a couple of minutes, he re-emerged carrying a pair of charcoal gray trousers that looked surprisingly modern despite their vintage cut. He held them up to me and said, "Try these on. They're slim fit but have a bit of stretch. Should work well with your measurements." I followed him to a small fitting room, which smelled faintly of cedar and leather. The lighting was soft, and there was a large, slightly scratched mirror on one wall. I started to change, trying to ignore the way my hands were shaking just a little. Sliding into the trousers, I was immediately impressed. They fit perfectly. The waist was snug but comfortable, the legs tapered just right, and for once, I felt like I looked put together. When I stepped out, he was waiting just outside the curtain with a smile that made my heart do an awkward flip. "How's that feel?" he asked, voice low and a little teasing. I caught myself smiling and said, "Honestly, better than any pants I've ever owned." He nodded like he knew that feeling all too well. Then, without missing a beat, he said, "That's the thing with clothes like this. It's not just about looking good. It's about feeling right in your own skin." I wasn't sure why, but that line stuck with me. Maybe it was the way he said it, like he'd spent a lot of time thinking about it. Or maybe it was because it felt like he was talking directly to me, not just making small talk. We fell into conversation after that, And honestly, it was one of the best chats I'd had in a while. He told me his name was Lucas, that he'd worked at the shop for about 3 years, and that he loved old clothes because each piece had a story. I realized he had this way of making things sound fascinating, even when he was just talking about fabric or tailoring. Somewhere between talking about vintage suit lore and the origins of the store's famous pinstripe collection, I found myself opening up more than I expected. I told him about how I'd been stuck in a rut. Work was fine, but my personal life was kind of a desert, and I figured maybe upgrading my wardrobe was a small step toward shaking things up. Lucas listened, really listened, and I swear you could see it in his eyes that he cared. When I mentioned how I'd been hesitant to come in, thinking these places were for people who actually knew how to dress, he just laughed and said, "Everyone deserves to feel good about what they're wearing, especially you." That simple sentence hit me harder than I thought it would. The hours slipped by without me even noticing. Lucas pulled out different pieces, suggesting shirts and jackets that would pair well with the pants. He was patient, never rushing me, and somehow the shop stopped feeling like a store and started feeling like a little bubble, just the two of us surrounded by clothes that smelled like history and possibility. At one point, he caught me looking at a burgundy velvet blazer tucked away in the corner and raised an eyebrow. Thinking about getting bold? I laughed and shrugged. Maybe. Why not? He smiled, this slow, genuine smile, and said, "Sometimes, the boldest choices are the ones that surprise us the most." It was then that I realized he wasn't just selling clothes. He was selling confidence, or maybe just reminding me that it was already there, hiding beneath layers of self-doubt. Before I knew it, the afternoon had turned into evening and the shop was starting to close. Lucas was helping me pack up my new clothes when I blurted out, "Hey, would you want to maybe grab a coffee sometime?" Outside of fitting me for pants? He paused, and for a split second I thought maybe I'd made a fool of myself. But then he grinned, this easy, warm grin that made me feel like I'd just scored a jackpot. "I'd like that," he said simply. As I walked out of the shop that night, bag in hand and a weird, thrilling mixture of hope and nerves buzzing through me, I realized something. I wasn't just walking out with new pants. I was stepping into something new entirely, and I had a feeling Lucas was going to be a big part of it. The next day, I found myself staring at my phone a lot more than usual, debating whether to text Lucas first or let him make the move. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not exactly smooth when it comes to this sort of thing. After a couple of false starts where I almost hit send and then chickened out, I finally texted, "Coffee?" To my surprise, Lucas replied almost immediately, "Definitely. How about 7? There's a great little place around the corner from the shop." So 7 came around faster than I expected, and I found myself standing outside this cozy coffee shop with warm yellow lights spilling onto the street. I was the cliché nervous guy again, fiddling with the cuffs of my shirt, which, by the way, was one of the ones Lucas had recommended at the shop. Wearing it felt weirdly empowering. Lucas was already there when I walked in, casually leaning against the counter, scanning through a book, when he looked up and smiled. My heart did that stupid jump you get when you like someone a lot more than you thought you would. "Hey," he said, setting the book aside and coming over. "You made it. Wouldn't miss it," I said, trying to sound cooler than I felt. We ordered our drinks and found a small table in the corner. The place was quiet, filled with the soft murmur of other patrons and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. It felt intimate, like a bubble away from the usual noise of the world. We started talking like we had all the time in the world. I found out Lucas wasn't just into vintage clothes. He was into music, old movies, and had a knack for storytelling that made even his daily commute sound fascinating. I told him about my job, my love-hate relationship with the city, and somehow the conversation dipped into the awkward but honest territory of dating. "I haven't been on a real date in ages," I admitted, half grinning. "Mostly because I'm terrible at making plans, and honestly, a little scared of putting myself out there." Lucas nodded, eyes sincere. "Yeah, I get that. It's like the more you want it to go right, the more you worry it'll all fall apart." I laughed, surprised at how much I felt like I could tell him anything. There was a comfort in his presence that didn't feel forced or rushed. For a while, we simply sat there, sipping our coffee, talking about everything and nothing. At one point, Lucas reached across the table and brushed a stray strand of hair from my forehead, his fingers lingering a beat longer than necessary. That little touch sent a wave of warmth through me that I wasn't ready to explain. As the night went on, the connection between us started to feel less like the excitement of something new and more like the beginning of something real. I didn't want the night to end, but eventually, we had to part ways. Outside, under the street lamp's soft glow, Lucas hesitated just a second before leaning in to kiss me. It was gentle, tentative, like we were both finding our footing. The kiss was, unexpectedly electric. I felt a rush of hope and something like belonging, like maybe I'd found a person who saw me, not just the awkward guy needing pants, but the messy, hopeful version beneath it all. Same time next week? He asked with a shy smile. Absolutely, I said, grinning like an idiot. Walking back to my apartment, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected places, like a dusty old suit shop, can change everything. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to what came next. The week that followed was this weird mix of excitement and nerves that I hadn't felt in a long time. Every time my phone buzzed, I caught myself hoping it was Lucas. I kept replaying that night's kiss over and over in my head, wondering if I'd imagined how electric it felt. But the texts he sent me, little jokes, questions about my day, even a photo of the shop's new arrivals, made it clear he hadn't either. When the night of our second coffee date rolled around, I found myself pacing my apartment, trying to decide what to wear. I went with the burgundy velvet blazer Lucas had pointed out in the shop, but I hadn't dared try on that day. I figured if I was stepping into something new with him, maybe I could take a chance on the bold stuff too. I was a little early when I got back to the coffee shop, and Lucas was already there, waiting with that same easy smile that made my stomach twist in the best way. We grabbed our usual drinks and found a quiet corner away from the usual crowd. As we settled in, Lucas leaned over and said, I was thinking maybe I could take you to the shop after we finish here, show you some more hidden gems. I raised an eyebrow, feeling that familiar flutter. Hidden gems, huh? Sounds like you've got a whole secret world back there. He grinned, this time with a spark that said he definitely did. I do. It's not just about clothes. It's about stories, memories, and sometimes a little magic. I rolled my eyes, but I couldn't stop smiling. That's when he started telling me about one of the shop's most prized pieces, a three-piece suit that apparently belonged to some jazz legend from the 1940s. He described the way the fabric had been painstakingly preserved, the details in the stitching, even the faint scent of old tobacco and whiskey that still clung to the lining. I was genuinely fascinated, but more than that, I was fascinated by how Lucas talked about it, with this passion that lit up his eyes. It was like I was seeing a side of him that wasn't just the charming guy who measured my inseam slowly and made me feel like the most important person in the room. When we finally made it back to the shop, the place felt different at night, quieter, more intimate. Lucas flicked on some warm lights and pulled out a few pieces from behind the curtain, letting me touch the fabrics, run my fingers over buttons and lapels that told stories without words. At one point, he held up a pair of suspenders and said, "These could totally work with your style. Vintage, but versatile." I laughed. I'm not sure I'm ready to commit to suspenders, but I'll think about it. He winked. You're full of surprises. We spent hours in there, talking, laughing, and sharing little moments that felt like they were stitching us closer together. Somewhere between a story about a suit that survived a shipwreck and the way his hand brushed mine while picking up a tie, I realized that this wasn't just about clothes or dates anymore. It was about connection, the kind you don't find every day. Later, as we closed up the shop together, Lucas looked at me with this intensity that made me catch my breath. I'm really glad you came in that day. You changed the whole rhythm of this place for me. I smiled, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the thicker fabric around me. I think you changed mine too. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us full but comfortable. Then, without warning, Lucas pulled me into a slow, deliberate kiss, one that said, "I'm here," and "I'm not going anywhere," all at once. When we finally pulled apart, I whispered, "So, where does this go now?" He chuckled softly. "Anywhere you want, but maybe, for starters, let's see where the weekend takes us." I nodded, heart pounding. I'm in. Walking home that night, I realized that sometimes the best fits aren't just about the clothes. They're about finding someone who measures up to your heart. And with Lucas, I was ready to try on something new, no matter how bold or unexpected it might be. The weekend came faster than I expected, and honestly, I was more nervous than I'd been on any of our dates so far. I think part of it was because it wasn't another casual coffee or a quick stroll through the shop. Lucas had mentioned wanting to take me somewhere a little different, and my imagination immediately ran wild with possibilities that ranged from charming to completely awkward. When Saturday evening rolled around, I found myself standing outside Lucas's apartment building, a little unsure of what to expect. He buzzed me up with that same easy confidence I'd come to love, and when the door swung open, he was there with a bright smile and a pair of tickets in his hand. "Ready for a little adventure?" he asked. I nodded, trying to look cooler than I felt. "Absolutely." We hopped on the subway and headed downtown. On the train, Lucas kept me entertained with stories about some of the city's hidden gems. His voice low and casual, but with that spark that made everything feel alive. Before I knew it, we were stepping off at a part of town I didn't know well, and Lucas led me down a narrow street lit by string lights and the soft glow of vintage signs. "This," he said, gesturing to a small building with a faded marquee, "is a speakeasy. Well, not really from the Prohibition era, but it tries to capture that vibe." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You've got me curious." Inside, the place was dim and cozy, filled with the hum of quiet conversations and the clink of glasses. The walls were covered in dark wood paneling and old photographs, and a jazz band was setting up in the corner. Lucas guided me to a booth near the back, and as we settled in, he looked over at me with a grin. "Figured since you like vintage, you'd appreciate the atmosphere." I smiled, feeling that warm buzz of contentment that comes from being somewhere with the right person. We ordered drinks, classic Tool tales that tasted like they belonged in another time, and the music started. The saxophone wove through the room, smooth and soulful, and Lucas reached across the table to take my hand. "You know," he said quietly, "I didn't just want to show you cool places. I wanted to share something that means a lot to me." I squeezed his hand, sensing the weight behind his words. "I'm glad you did." As the night wore on, we talked about everything. Our families, our fears, the little things that made us who we are. Lucas told me about growing up in a small town, where being different wasn't exactly easy, and how the shop had become his sanctuary, a place where he could be himself without judgment. Listening to him, I felt a connection deeper than I'd expected. It wasn't just attraction anymore. It was understanding, empathy, and something tender that made me want to protect him as much as be close to him. At one point, during a slow song, Lucas pulled me closer, his forehead resting against mine. "I'm really glad you walked into that shop," he murmured. "Me too," I said honestly. After the music ended, we lingered in the speakeasy a little longer before stepping back out into the night. The city was quiet, the streets slick from a recent rain, and we walked slowly, hands intertwined. Eventually, we found ourselves in a small park, the kind with old benches and trees that looked like they'd been there forever. We sat down, and Lucas rested his head on my shoulder. "I don't want this night to end," he said softly. "Neither do I admitted. We stayed there for a while, wrapped up in the comfort of each other's presence, until the chill of the evening made us reluctantly stand. As we headed back toward the subway, Lucas stopped me and said, "There's something I want to show you tomorrow, if you're up for it." Curious, I nodded. "Definitely." The next day, we met up again, this time for a walk through an old part of the city Lucas loved. He led me to a small, hidden courtyard, surrounded by ivy-covered brick walls and filled with blooming flowers. In the middle stood a vintage photo booth with a faded sign that said, "Step inside for memories." Lucas grinned and pulled me inside. We squeezed into the tiny space, and as the camera counted down, we leaned into each other. The pictures came out as strips of black and white photos, us laughing, making silly faces, and finally, caught in a quiet moment where our foreheads touched. We taped the strips to the wall in the shop later that week, right next to the suits and ties. Every time I saw them, I was reminded that sometimes the best fits come from the most unexpected places and people. With Lucas, The vintage shop wasn't just about clothes anymore. It was the start of a story I never saw coming, and one I'm excited to keep writing. After that weekend, everything felt like it was unfolding with this slow, steady rhythm, kind of like the way Lucas measured my inseam that first day in the shop, carefully and without rush. I started spending more time at the vintage suit store, sometimes just hanging out with him, talking about random things while he worked alterations or organized the racks. It was weirdly comfortable, like I'd found a little pocket of peace in the chaos of my usual routine. One afternoon, I showed up at the shop right as the sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows through the front windows. Lucas was there, folding a crisply pressed white shirt, and when he saw me, his face lit up. "Hey," he said, setting the shirt aside. "I was starting to wonder if you were avoiding me." I chuckled. "No way, just life, you know." He nodded and then gestured toward the back room. "I've been meaning to show you something." Curious, I followed him through the curtain into the cramped but cozy space where all the tailoring magic happened. He pulled out a box from a dusty shelf and opened it with a reverence that made me wonder what I was about to see. Inside were a bunch of old photographs, yellowed at the edges, showing men in sharp suits, some posing proudly in front of the store, others laughing around tables or standing near classic cars. Lucas picked one up, a black and white shot of a younger man with slicked back hair and a cheeky grin. "That's my grandfather," Lucas said, voice softer now. "He started the shop back in the 50s. I took the photo from him and studied it." There was something striking about the man, confidence mixed with warmth, like he owned the world but never forgot where he came from. "He was kind of a legend around here," Lucas continued. "People say he had a knack for finding the perfect suit for anyone who walked in. He believed clothes could change how you see yourself." I smiled, thinking about how that legacy was alive in the way Lucas treated every customer, especially me. "Sounds like he was pretty great." "He was," Lucas agreed, "and sometimes I feel like I'm trying to live up to that. Not just the tailoring, but the whole idea of helping people feel like they belong." I looked at him, seeing the weight behind his words. "You're doing a damn good job." There was a beat of silence, then Lucas shifted a bit, almost nervously. "Can I be honest?" "Always." He hesitated, then said, "I haven't really done this before. Like dating someone like you, or just letting myself want something more." I blinked, surprised but also relieved. "Me neither. I've spent so long just trying not to get hurt that I forgot how it feels to really hope for something." He smiled, that shy, genuine smile I was growing addicted to. "Maybe we're both figuring it out." I reached out and took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine. "We'll figure it out together." From then on, things kept evolving in this quiet, beautiful way. We started cooking dinner together at Lucas's place, him teaching me how to make a proper risotto, me trying not to burn the garlic. We took walks through the neighborhood, discovering little cafes and hole-in-the-wall bookstores. Every moment felt like a new layer being added to something fragile but real. One rainy evening, we found ourselves back at the shop long after closing time. The rain tapped softly against the windows, and the only light came from the lamp above the counter. Lucas was adjusting a jacket on a mannequin when he looked over at me. "You know," he said, "this place doesn't feel as lonely when you're here." I smiled, stepping closer so our shoulders brushed. "Neither do I." He turned to face me fully, eyes searching. "I'm sorry if I'm moving too fast. I really like you." My heart hammered in my chest, the words hitting me like a warm wave. "I really like you too, Lucas, more than I expected to." His grin was infectious, and suddenly he was pulling me in for a kiss that tasted like hope and new beginnings. It was different from before, not tentative, but sure, like we were both ready to leap together. As we pulled apart, he whispered, "So what do you say we keep building this? One stitch at a time?" I laughed softly, feeling more certain than I ever had. "I say yes. And maybe, just maybe, I'm ready to start measuring my life with you." Lucas's eyes sparkled in the dim light, and for the first time, I truly believed we'd found something worth holding on to. The vintage shop wasn't just a backdrop anymore. It was where our story was unfolding, one careful, perfect fit at a time. Months passed, and with each day, Lucas and I settled deeper into this unexpected but welcomed rhythm. The suit shop became our little sanctuary, a place where time slowed and the outside world melted away. I'd never thought I'd find so much comfort among racks of vintage clothes, but somehow, with Lucas there, it all made sense. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the dusty windows, Lucas handed me a carefully folded jacket, a piece he'd been saving for someone special. I slipped it on, feeling the weight of the fabric and something more, the quiet promise woven into every stitch. He looked at me, eyes steady and warm. "You wear it well," I smiled, heartful. "Only because you showed me how to fit into something better." We stood close, the hum of the city just beyond the door, and in that moment, it didn't feel like just a jacket or a pair of pants. It felt like trust, like hope, like the kind of connection you don't stumble upon every day, but know instantly when it's real. Looking back, I realize how strange it is, how measuring an inseam could lead to so much more. But that's the thing about life, isn't it? The little moments, the unexpected encounters, they shape us in ways we never imagined. Lucas and I didn't need grand gestures or perfect plans. We built something honest, one day at a time, folding laughter and quiet talks into the seams of our story. And maybe that's the best kind of fit. Something comfortable, genuine, and just right. As I walked home that evening, the jacket wrapped around me like a second skin. I felt something I hadn't in a long time. A quiet certainty that this was where I belonged, with him, and in this patchwork of moments that felt like home.